My wife walked into courtroom with edited recordings, a top divorce lawyer, and claims I abused her. She demanded half my business, the estate, and monthly payments. The judge was convinced. Until I stood up and said, "Your Honor," she forgot who installed the cameras. So there I am, sitting in this courthouse that smells like stale coffee and broken dreams, watching my wife Brielle make her grand entrance like she's auditioning for the lead role in Wronged Woman, the musical. I swear to God, she's got this whole production down pat. The perfectly timed sniffle, the way she clutches her purse like it's a security blanket, and that little wobble in her step that screams, "Fragile victim," louder than a fire alarm at 3 in the morning. The woman who couldn't remember to pick up my dry cleaning for 6 months straight suddenly has the memory of a NASA computer when it comes to documenting my alleged sins. Her lawyer, Samantha Hoffman, is this sharp-dressed shark in a Chanel suit who probably charges more per hour than most people make in a week. She's got this briefcase that looks like it cost more than my first truck, and she's treating those edited recordings like they're the freaking Dead Sea Scrolls. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here in my best suit, which, let's be honest, isn't saying much since I usually live in jeans and work boots, trying not to laugh at the absurdity of it all. This is the same woman who called me crying because she couldn't figure out how to use the can opener, and now she's supposedly some kind of digital editing mastermind? The judge, this stern-looking woman with glasses that could probably cut glass, keeps shooting me these looks like I'm already guilty of whatever crime Brielle's cooking up. I can practically see the thoughts running through her head. Another angry husband, another domestic dispute. Let's just get this over with. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets really rich. I'm the guy who built Hayes Freight Services from literally nothing. My dad left me one beat-up Ford truck that had more problems than a reality TV show, and I turned that pile of scrap metal into a multi-million-dollar operation with 18 trucks rolling across half the country. You think a guy who can turn rust into gold can't spot a con job when it's happening right in front of him? Brielle's sitting there with her tissues, dabbing at her eyes with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer, and I'm thinking about all those late nights I caught her practicing in the bathroom mirror. I used to think she was just being vain, you know? Like maybe she was working on her selfie game or something equally ridiculous. But now I realize she was rehearsing. Actually rehearsing. These wounded expressions like she was preparing for the audition of her lifetime. And in a way, she was, wasn't she? This whole courtroom is her stage, and she's giving it everything she's got. The really twisted part is how good she's gotten at this act. When we first met, Brielle couldn't lie her way out of a paper bag. She'd get all flustered and start giggling whenever she tried to tell even the tiniest white lie about why she was late or where she'd been. But somewhere along the line, she turned into Meryl Streep with a grudge and a legal team. It's actually kind of impressive in the most terrifying way possible. Like watching a car accident in slow motion. You know it's going to be awful, but you can't look away. Her attorney starts laying out the case, and I have to give credit where it's due. They've done their homework. They've got recordings, timestamps, even some grainy security footage that makes me look like I'm starring in my own personal horror movie. The way Hoffman presents it, I'm basically a monster who's been psychologically tormenting poor, innocent Brielle for months. She talks about patterns of behavior and escalating aggression like she's got a psychology degree instead of a law degree. The whole thing would be hilarious if it wasn't my life she was trying to destroy. But here's what really gets me, and I mean really gets under my skin, is the sheer audacity of it all. This woman lived in my house, drove my cars, spent my money, and enjoyed every single benefit of the business I built with my own 2 hands. She never worked a day in her life after we got married, claiming she was finding herself or exploring her creative side. And her creative side, apparently, was figuring out how to frame me for emotional abuse while planning her exit strategy like she's some kind of criminal mastermind. I look around this courtroom, at the judge who's already made up her mind, at the court reporter who's probably heard this same song and dance 1,000 times before, at the handful of spectators who showed up for the free entertainment, and I can't help but think about how we got here. 6 months ago, I thought my biggest problem was finding reliable drivers for my freight routes. Now I'm sitting in family court, watching my wife perform Shakespeare while her lawyer tries to convince everyone that I'm the villain in this little drama. The thing that really kills me, though, is that part of me, a small, stupid part of me, is actually proud of her. Not proud of what she's doing, obviously, but proud of the commitment, the attention to detail, the sheer brass balls it takes to pull off something this elaborate. If she'd put half this effort into our marriage, we might actually have had something worth fighting for. Instead, she chose to channel all that energy into destroying me, and I've got to admit, she's doing a pretty damn good job of it. As I sit there watching Brielle work the room like a seasoned politician, dabbing her eyes at just the right moments and letting her voice crack in all the perfect places, I realize that this isn't just about money or property or even revenge. This is about control, about power, about proving that she's smarter than everyone thought she was. And the scary thing is, she might just be right. So here I am, sitting in this legal circus, and I figure it's time to give the jury, and honestly, myself, a little backstory about how we ended up in this mess. Because let me tell you, the journey from broke kid with a busted truck to successful business owner married to a woman who practices Oscar speeches in the bathroom mirror is one hell of a ride, and not the fun kind you pay extra for at Six Flags. Let's start with the truck, Dad's old Ford that he left me when he passed. This thing was so beat up, it made a junkyard special look like a brand new Cadillac. I'm talking about a vehicle that broke down more often than my high school girlfriend's promises to call me back. The engine sounded like a dying walrus. The transmission had more personalities than a psychiatric ward, and the brakes were basically a suggestion rather than a functional safety feature. But it was mine, and more importantly, it was all I had. I remember those first few months after Dad died, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with this rolling disaster. Everyone in town kept giving me that look. You know the one, like they were watching a puppy trying to solve calculus. Poor Marcus, they'd whisper, doesn't know what he's gotten himself into. And they were right, sort of. I didn't know jack about running a freight business. Dad never taught me the ins and outs because he probably figured he'd live forever, like most stubborn old truckers do. But here's the thing about being broke and desperate. It makes you creative real fast. I spent my last $200 on a mechanic's manual thicker than the Bible and twice as confusing, and I taught myself how to fix that truck through pure necessity and a lot of colorful language that would make a sailor blush. YouTube wasn't really a thing back then, so I was learning by trial and error, emphasis on the error part. I probably spent more time under the hood than behind the wheel those first 6 months. The breakthrough came when old Mrs. Henderson needed her antique furniture moved from Nashville to Memphis, and every other moving company wanted to charge her more than the furniture was worth. I offered to do it for half their price, figuring even if I barely broke even, at least I'd have gas money for the week. That truck wheezed and groaned the whole way, but we made it, and Mrs. Henderson was so grateful she started telling all her church friends about that nice Hayes boy with the reasonable prices. Word of mouth is a beautiful thing in Tennessee. Before I knew it, I was getting calls from small businesses, families moving, even a few bigger companies who needed freight moved but didn't want to deal with the big national outfits. Every job I took, I saved every penny I could, living off peanut butter sandwiches and whatever leftovers I could scrounge up. It wasn't glamorous, but it was progress, and progress felt better than anything I'd ever experienced. By year 2, I had saved enough to buy a second truck, still used, still temperamental, but slightly less likely to burst into flames on I-40. By year 3, I had 4 trucks and enough steady contracts to quit worrying about whether I could afford both rent and groceries in the same month. The business grew like kudzu in August, spreading faster than I could keep track of, and suddenly Hayes Freight Services wasn't just a pipe dream anymore. It was a real company with real trucks and real employees who depended on me for their paychecks. That's when I met Brielle at some Chamber of Commerce mixer I went to because they promised free food and potential networking opportunities. She was working as a receptionist at a dental office, complaining to anyone who'd listen about how boring her job was and how she deserved something better. She was beautiful, I'll give her that, with this laugh that could light up a room and a way of making you feel like you were the most interesting person she'd ever met. Looking back, I realized that was probably her first hint at the acting skills she'd develop later. We dated for about 8 months before I proposed, and during that time, she seemed genuinely impressed with what I'd built. She'd come to the depot sometimes, bringing lunch for the drivers, asking questions about the routes and the contracts. I thought she was interested in the business, maybe even thinking about getting involved somehow. What I didn't realize was that she was conducting reconnaissance, figuring out exactly how much everything was worth and how it all worked. After we got married, things changed pretty quickly. Brielle quit her job, saying she wanted to focus on supporting my career and making our house a home. Translation: she wanted to spend her days shopping online, getting her nails done, and watching reality TV shows about women who married rich men. At first, I didn't mind. Hell, I was proud that I could afford to let my wife stay home if that's what she wanted. I thought it meant I'd made it, that I was successful enough to support both of us comfortably. But somewhere along the line, supporting my career turned into criticizing every business decision I made, and making our house a home turned into redecorating every 6 months with furniture that cost more than some people's cars. She started talking about how the other wives in her new social circle, because apparently being married to a business owner automatically gets you into some kind of exclusive club, had bigger houses, fancier cars, more expensive jewelry. The really messed up part is that while she was complaining about not having enough, the business kept growing. We went from 4 trucks to 8, then 12, then 18. We were pulling in contracts with major retailers, moving freight across 3 states, employing over 20 people. I should have been on top of the world, but instead, I was coming home every night to a wife who looked at our success like it was somehow inadequate, like I was personally disappointing her by not being Jeff Bezos. And that's when her new hobby started. What I now realize was her intensive training program for this courtroom performance. The late-night research sessions, the mysterious mood swings, the way she'd suddenly start recording conversations on her phone for her own protection. I thought she was going through some kind of midlife crisis, or maybe just adjusting to having more money than she'd ever had before. Turns out, she was preparing for the biggest performance of her life, and I was too busy building an empire to notice that my wife was planning to burn it all down. You know how they say hindsight is 20/20? Well, mine's more like 2010 with corrective lenses and a magnifying glass. Because looking back at the signs Brielle was dropping, I must have been blind as a bat wearing a blindfold in a cave during a solar eclipse. It all started innocently enough, or at least what I thought was innocent back when I still believed my wife's biggest concern was whether we should get granite or quartz countertops for the kitchen renovation. It was about 8 months ago when she first mentioned being interested in real estate opportunities. I remember thinking, hey, that's actually pretty smart, because property investment seemed like a logical next step for someone married to a guy whose business was doing better than expected. She started spending hours on her laptop, which wasn't unusual since she'd always been glued to social media like it was her full-time job. But instead of scrolling through Facebook drama and Instagram influencers hawking detox teas, she was suddenly really focused on these real estate websites. At first, she'd show me properties she claimed we should consider buying as rental investments. Look at this duplex in Murfreesboro, she'd say, spinning the laptop around to show me some rundown place that looked like it needed more work than my dad's old truck. The listing says it's got great potential. I'd nod and make appropriate husband noises about how we'd need to crunch the numbers, but honestly, I was usually too tired from work to pay much attention to her newfound interest in property management. Then she started asking questions about the business that seemed oddly specific for someone who'd never shown much interest in freight logistics before. How exactly do you structure the company assets? She'd ask while I was trying to watch SportsCenter. I mean, if something happened to you, how would that work? When I'd look at her funny, she'd quickly add something like, I just want to understand our financial situation better, honey. You work so hard, and I feel like I should know more about what you've built. Seemed reasonable enough at the time. Hell, I was actually pleased that she was finally taking an interest in understanding how we made our money. I started explaining things like LLC structures, equipment financing, and how our contracts worked. I even showed her some of the paperwork when she asked, thinking maybe she was finally ready to get involved in the business side of things. Looking back, I realized I was basically giving her a master class in how to dismantle everything I'd worked for. The real red flag should have been when she started asking about asset protection. She'd bring it up casually, like she was just curious about smart financial planning. I was reading this article about how successful business owners protect their wealth, she'd say, then launch into questions about offshore accounts, trusts, and something called judgment proofing. When I asked where she was getting all this information, she'd wave it off like it was just general research. But here's where it gets really interesting. And by interesting, I mean terrifying enough to make Stephen King jealous. I noticed her browser history was starting to look like she was either planning to become a forensic accountant or rob a bank. We're talking about searches for things like marital asset division Tennessee, emotional distress settlements, and my personal favorite, how to prove financial abuse in divorce court. When I asked her about it, she had this perfectly reasonable explanation ready. She was researching for her friend Ashley, whose marriage was supposedly falling apart. Now, Ashley is about as sharp as a bowling ball and twice as dense, so the idea that Brielle would be doing legal research for her seemed plausible enough. Plus, Brielle had always been the type to get way too involved in other people's drama, so I figured she was just being a supportive friend. What I didn't realize was that Ashley's situation was basically Brielle's practice run for her own divorce strategy. The questions kept coming, but they got sneakier. During dinner, she'd casually ask things like, if a woman felt like her husband was controlling her financially, what would that look like legally? Or, I wonder how courts decide what constitutes emotional abuse versus just normal marital disagreements. She'd frame these as hypothetical discussions or stuff she'd heard on some podcast, but now I realize she was basically conducting market research for her upcoming performance. Meanwhile, she still couldn't figure out how to reset the Wi-Fi password without calling me at work, panicking because the internet was down and she couldn't access her shows. This is the same woman who was apparently mastering complex legal concepts about marital dissolution and asset protection. The cognitive dissonance should have been obvious, but I was too busy running a growing business to connect the dots between her sudden legal scholarship and her continued inability to program the coffee maker. Then came the technology questions. How do those security cameras at the depot work? She'd ask. Do they record audio or just video? When I explained that our newer systems captured both video and audio, she got really interested in the technical details. How long were recordings stored? Could they be edited? What about home security systems? Did they work the same way? I thought she was worried about break-ins at the house, maybe thinking about upgrading our security. Turns out, she was planning to turn my own surveillance system against me. The really twisted part is how methodical she was about it. She'd research during the day while I was at work, then test her knowledge with these innocent-seeming questions over dinner. It was like living with a spy who was gathering intelligence for an enemy I didn't know existed yet. She'd bookmark articles about narcissistic abuse and gaslighting, then ask me if I'd ever heard those terms, like she was genuinely curious about psychology. I started finding printouts sometimes, articles about divorce law, asset division, even some stuff about recording conversations legally in Tennessee. When I'd ask about them, she'd say they were for Ashley, or she was helping another friend, or she was just educating herself about women's rights, because it was important to be informed. Every explanation sounded perfectly reasonable on the surface, but now I realize I was watching someone build a case against me in real time, and I was actually helping her do it by answering all her questions like some kind of cooperative witness in my own prosecution. Now here's where this whole soap opera gets really rich, and by rich, I mean ironic enough to make Henry weep with joy. You see, I installed those security cameras around our property for one simple, logical reason: copper thieves. Yeah, you heard that right. The same criminal. Masterminds who think stealing copper wiring is a sustainable career path were targeting freight companies across Tennessee. And I'd be damned if I was going to let some meth head with bolt cutters cost me thousands in equipment replacement and insurance claims. I spent about $3,000 on a state-of-the-art surveillance system, complete with night vision, motion sensors, and audio recording that could pick up a whispered conversation from 50 feet away. The installer, this tech-savvy kid named Jimmy who looked like he lived on energy drinks and video games, set up cameras covering every angle of our property: the depot, the house, even the driveway. Mr. Hayes, he said, adjusting his thick glasses, this system is so advanced, it'll catch a fly landing on your mailbox. Nobody's stealing anything from you ever again. Little did I know that the biggest theft was already being planned, and it wasn't copper wire someone was after, it was my entire life's work. The cameras I installed to protect my business were about to become the star witnesses in my wife's elaborate frame job. It's like buying a guard dog and finding out it's been secretly working for the burglars the whole time. For about 6 months, those cameras did exactly what they were supposed to do. They caught a raccoon family that had taken up residence in our garbage cans, recorded the UPS guy doing what I can only describe as interpretive dance while delivering packages, and yes, They actually did catch some wannabe copper thief scoping out the depot one night. The system worked like a dream, and I felt pretty smart about the whole investment. But then I noticed something weird. Brielle, who usually avoided anything more technological than the microwave, started asking detailed questions about how the cameras worked. Do they record all the time, or just when they detect motion? She'd ask while we were having coffee. And where exactly are they placed around the house? When I'd show her the app on my phone that let me monitor the feeds remotely, she'd watch with the kind of intense focus she usually reserved for reality TV drama. The first time I caught her staging something, I thought I was losing my mind. I was reviewing footage from the previous week. Yeah, I actually watch that stuff sometimes, mainly because running a freight business makes you paranoid about liability. When I saw this weird scene of Brielle in our kitchen, apparently having some kind of emotional breakdown. She was gesturing wildly, her face all red and tear-streaked, looking like she was in the middle of the world's most dramatic argument. The thing was, I wasn't even home when this was recorded. According to the timestamp, I was at the depot dealing with a driver who'd gotten his truck stuck under a low bridge in Clarksville. So who exactly was Brielle having this emotional meltdown with? I scrolled through more footage and found my answer: nobody. She was literally practicing, running through what looked like different emotional responses, checking her reflection in the kitchen window, and then starting over with different facial expressions. At first, I thought maybe she was rehearsing for some community theater thing she hadn't told me about. Brielle had mentioned wanting to try acting a few times, and Lord knows she had the drama gene in spades. But then I started noticing a pattern. These rehearsal sessions always happened when I wasn't home, and they always seemed to involve scenarios where she looked upset, frightened, or emotionally devastated. The real kicker came when I discovered she'd figured out how to access the camera footage herself. Remember, this is the same woman who called me at work in tears because she couldn't figure out how to change the channel on our smart TV. But somehow, she'd managed to not only access the surveillance system, but also learned how to download and edit specific clips. I found her little project folder on our shared computer, labeled innocuously as Home Movies, but containing dozens of carefully edited video segments. These weren't just random clips. They were specifically edited scenes designed to make me look like the villain in some twisted domestic drama. She'd taken footage of me raising my voice, which happened exactly once when I came home to find she'd spent $1,500 on a designer purse without mentioning it, and edited out all the context. Gone was the part where I discovered the credit card statement. Gone was her defensive reaction. Gone was my apology 20 minutes later when I calmed down and realized I'd overreacted. What remained was a 30-second clip of me looking angry and speaking in a raised voice, with her looking small and scared in the background. It was like watching a movie trailer that completely misrepresented the actual film. She'd taken a minor marital disagreement about finances and turned it into evidence of domestic intimidation. But the real masterpiece of manipulation was what she did with our normal conversations. She'd somehow figured out how to isolate audio from video, taking clips of me saying things like, "You need to understand," or "I'm not going to argue about this." Perfectly normal statements from completely different contexts, and pairing them with video of her looking upset or frightened from entirely different days. The woman who couldn't remember to take the garbage out on trash day had somehow become a video editing wizard, creating what basically amounted to a highlight reel of Marcus Hayes' worst husband ever. She'd collected dozens of these clips over several months, building what looked like a comprehensive documentary of abuse that never actually happened. The most infuriating part was realizing how calculated it all was. Every time she'd ask me about the camera system, every innocent question about recording capabilities, every moment she'd seemed interested in the technical aspects, she was gathering intelligence for her project. She'd spent months learning how to use my own security system against me, turning the very technology I'd installed to protect my business into weapons for destroying my reputation. When I finally confronted her about the edited videos, she had the nerve to act confused and hurt. "I was just trying to document our relationship," she said, with tears that I now realize were probably rehearsed. "I thought maybe if we could see how we communicate, we could work on our marriage." The audacity was breathtaking. She was literally gaslighting me about her own gaslighting operation. So there I was, sitting in my office at 3 a.m, staring at edited video footage that made me look like I should be on America's Most Wanted, When it hit me like a freight truck doing 90 on I-40, I was going to need some serious backup for whatever storm Brielle was brewing. And let me tell you, when you're a guy who spent most of his adult life focused on moving cargo from point A to point B, suddenly needing a legal dream team feels about as natural as trying to teach a cat to fetch. The first call I made was to Earl Jackson. And if you don't know Earl, you're missing out on one of Tennessee's finest examples of how to survive both the trucking business and matrimonial warfare. This guy's been around the block more times than a UPS driver during Christmas season. He started Jackson Trucking back in the 70s with nothing but a beat-up Peterbilt and enough stubbornness to power a small city. By the time he retired 5 years ago, he was running 40 trucks and had survived 3 divorces that would make the War of 1812 look like a friendly disagreement about dinner plans. Earl's got this office above his old depot that looks like a museum of trucking history mixed with a divorce attorney's waiting room. The walls are covered with vintage trucking photos, CB radios from the Carter administration, and framed copies of 3 different divorce settlements that he keeps as reminders of expensive life lessons. When I showed up at his door that morning, looking like I'd been hit by everything he used to haul, he took one look at me and started brewing coffee strong enough to wake the dead. "Son," he said, settling into his chair that's older than most of my trucks. "You look like a man who's about to get taken to the cleaners, and I don't mean the kind that presses your shirts." I laid out the whole situation. The cameras, the edited footage, Brielle's sudden transformation from technology-challenged housewife to digital manipulation expert. Earl listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding like he'd heard this story before, which, considering his track record, he probably had. When I finished my tale of woe, Earl leaned back and gave me this look that was equal parts sympathy and amusement. "Marcus," he said, "let me give you some free advice that's worth more than my first truck. You're either fighting a divorce or auditioning for Shark Tank. Choose wisely, because the legal fees alone could buy you 3 more trucks, and lawyers don't come with warranties." That's when he introduced me to Wade Mercer, and calling Wade a lawyer is like calling a hurricane a light breeze. This guy practices family law the way a surgeon practices medicine, with precision, ruthlessness, and a fee structure that makes luxury car payments look reasonable. Wade's office is in one of those downtown Nashville buildings that screams success so loudly you can hear it from the parking garage, and his receptionist looks like she could intimidate a mob boss just by adjusting her reading glasses. The first consultation with Wade cost me $1,500, and that was just for him to say hello and tell me to sit down. But within 10 minutes of explaining my situation, I knew every penny was going to be worth it. This guy had seen more divorce schemes than a soap opera writer, and he started taking notes with the enthusiasm of a kid opening Christmas presents. "Mr. Hayes," Wade said, adjusting his tie that probably cost more than most people's rent, "your wife has made 2 critical errors. First, she underestimated your intelligence, and second, she overestimated her own cleverness. We're going to use both of those mistakes against her." He leaned forward like he was sharing state secrets. "But we're going to need some technical backup to prove what she's done." That's how I met Dr. Susan Andrews. And let me tell you, this woman is what happens when CSI meets MIT with a side order of righteous indignation. She runs a digital forensics company that specializes in uncovering electronic evidence manipulation, which sounds fancy, but basically means she's a professional lie detector for the computer age. Her office looks like something from a sci-fi movie, with screens showing code that might as well be ancient hieroglyphics to a guy like me. Dr. Andrews examined my surveillance system like she was performing surgery on it, downloading files and running analysis programs that made my head spin faster than a truck tire on black ice. "Mr. Hayes," she said after about 2 hours of technical wizardry, "your wife is either a criminal mastermind or she had help. The level of sophistication in these edits is impressive, but she left digital fingerprints all over everything. Turns out, every time Brielle accessed the camera system, downloaded footage, or made edits, the computer recorded timestamps, IP addresses, and metadata that basically created a roadmap of her entire operation. It was like she'd robbed a bank and left her driver's license at the scene. Dr. Andrews could prove not just that the videos were edited, but exactly when they were edited, which clips were manipulated, and even recover some of the original footage that Brielle thought she'd deleted. The 3 of them together, Earl with his hard-earned wisdom, Wade with his legal expertise, and Dr. Andrews with her technical skills, made me feel like I was assembling the Avengers for family court. Earl would call it building your convoy, because in trucking, you don't travel dangerous roads alone. Wade preferred military metaphors, talking about battlefield strategy and superior firepower. Dr. Andrews just called it scientific method applied to matrimonial fraud, which sounded way more impressive than anything I could come up with. But the real game changer was Earl's perspective on the whole situation. During one of our strategy sessions, he looked at me with those eyes that had seen everything twice and said, "Marcus, you built a multi-million-dollar business from a truck that barely ran. You think some woman with a laptop and attitude is going to take you down? Hell, son, this is just another delivery route, and you've never missed a deadline yet." That's when it clicked for me. This wasn't just about saving my marriage or protecting my assets. This was about delivering justice, and I'd been running deliveries my whole life. I had the best team money could buy, evidence that would make Perry Mason jealous, and a righteous anger that burned hotter than a truck engine climbing the Smokies in July. Picture this. I'm coming home after a 14-hour day that included a driver getting lost in downtown Memphis. Apparently GPS is optional for some people. A delivery truck breaking down in Jackson, and discovering that one of my newest hires thought Freight Manifest was some kind of spiritual awakening. All I wanted was a cold beer, some leftover pizza, and maybe catch the last few innings of whatever game was on. Instead, I walk into my kitchen and find a stack of legal papers sitting on the counter next to a sticky note that said, "We need to talk." Now, let me pause here to appreciate the absolute audacity of this moment. After months of secret recordings, video editing masterclasses, and what I now know was basically a PhD program in How to Screw Over Your Husband 101, Brielle chose to deliver divorce papers with all the ceremony of leaving a grocery list. No dramatic confrontation, no tearful explanation. "No, it's not you. It's me" speech. Just legal documents and a post-it note like she was reminding me to pick up milk on the way home. I stared at those papers for a solid 5 minutes, trying to process what I was looking at. The top page had my name printed in big, official-looking letters. Hayes versus Hayes, petition for dissolution of marriage. Seeing your own name on divorce papers is like getting punched in the gut by reality, while irony kicks you in the shins for good measure. The woman who still couldn't figure out how to program the coffee maker had somehow managed to navigate the Tennessee court system and file for divorce. But here's where it gets really entertaining. And by entertaining, I mean horrifying enough to make a horror movie director take notes. As I flipped through the paperwork, I realized this wasn't just a simple divorce petition. This was a full-scale legal assault designed to leave me with nothing but the clothes on my back and maybe enough change for a cup of coffee, assuming I could find one that cost less than 50 cents. The asset division section read like a wish list written by someone who'd been hitting the eggnog too hard at Christmas. She wanted half of Hayes Freight Services, the business I'd built from literally nothing while she was busy perfecting her manicure technique. She wanted the house, which I'd bought and renovated mostly by myself because hiring contractors was too expensive according to her financial expertise. She wanted both cars, including the truck I used for work, apparently thinking I could run a freight business by riding the city bus to client meetings. But wait, there's more. She was also requesting spousal support in an amount that basically equaled my entire annual salary. Let me break this down for you. She wanted me to pay her every month an amount of money that would let her live better than she ever had while married to me, while I presumably figured out how to survive on whatever was left after the lawyers, the court, and her shopping addiction got their cuts. The really special touch was the section about emotional distress and mental anguish. According to these papers, living with me had been so traumatic that she deserved additional compensation for the psychological damage I'd allegedly inflicted. The woman who spent most of our marriage complaining that I worked too much was now claiming that my work ethic had somehow emotionally scarred her. It was like being sued by someone for the crime of paying their bills. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten thousands of meals together, where she'd shown me those real estate opportunities, where I'd explained business concepts while she planned my financial execution, and I started laughing. Not because anything was funny, but because the alternative was either crying or putting my fist through the wall, and I'd just had that wall repainted. The laughter turned into the kind of hysterical giggling you hear from people who've just realized they've been living with a complete stranger for 3 years. Every memory I had of our marriage was suddenly suspect. Had she been planning this during our anniversary dinner last year? Was she thinking about asset division when she was picking out Christmas presents? Had our entire relationship been nothing more than research for this legal document? Then reality hit me like a truck carrying a full load down a steep hill with failed brakes. My bank accounts were frozen. I discovered this delightful fact when I tried to order pizza, and my credit card got declined faster than a job application from someone with face tattoos. Apparently, filing for divorce comes with automatic financial holds, which meant I couldn't access my own money while we sorted things out in court. So there I was, sitting in my own house, looking at papers that basically amounted to a legal mugging, unable to buy dinner with my own money, and trying to figure out how I'd gone from successful business owner to financially frozen disaster victim in the space of one afternoon. The woman who used to ask me for $20 to get her nails done had somehow managed to lock me out of accounts that contained money I'd earned before I even met her. I called Wade immediately, because if you're going to have a legal crisis, you might as well have it with professional representation. His assistant answered on the second ring with that perfectly polished voice that screams, "Billable hours." When I explained the situation, she transferred me to Wade faster than I'd ever been transferred anywhere, which either meant he was expecting this call or business was really slow that day. "Marcus," Wade said when he picked up, "take a deep breath and don't do anything stupid. These papers are exactly what we expected, which means she's playing right into our strategy. The frozen accounts are standard procedure, but we can get emergency relief for business operations. The demands are so outrageous that they're actually going to work in our favor." Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one discovering that his wife had basically declared financial war while leaving a note that looked like it was written by a teenager. But hearing Wade's confident voice reminded me that I wasn't facing this alone anymore. I had Earl's experience, Wade's expertise, and Dr. Andrews' technical skills backing me up. Still, as I sat there holding those papers, surrounded by the life I'd built and that Brielle was trying to dismantle, I couldn't help but think about that sticky note. "We need to talk." After everything she'd put in motion, all the planning and scheming and legal maneuvering, she still thought we needed to talk. The audacity was almost impressive. So apparently, before you can have a proper courtroom showdown with your lying, scheming wife, the state of Tennessee requires you to sit through something called mediation, which is basically couples therapy for people who already hate each other. The mediator, Dr. Patricia Lawson, had this calming office with soft lighting and inspirational posters about finding common ground and peaceful resolution. I felt like I was attending a yoga class for the criminally dishonest. Dr. Lawson had that therapist voice that probably worked great with actual reasonable people having genuine relationship problems, but seemed wildly inadequate for dealing with my wife's Oscar-worthy performance. "Today we're going to focus on open communication and finding mutually beneficial solutions," she said. Like we were there to discuss who forgot to take out the garbage instead of figuring out how much of my life's work Brielle was going to steal. Wade had prepped me for this meeting with the intensity of a football coach before the Super Bowl. "Remember," he'd said, "mediation is theater. She's going to perform, and we're going to let her. The more unreasonable she appears, the better our position in court. Don't take the bait, don't lose your temper, and whatever you do, don't agree to anything without my approval." Easy advice to give. Harder to follow when you're watching your wife audition for the role of most wronged woman in Tennessee history. Brielle arrived 15 minutes late, which was actually early for her by marriage standards, looking like she'd been hit by a truck full of emotional trauma. I'm talking about bags under her eyes that could carry groceries, clothes that looked like she'd grabbed them from the dirty laundry pile, and this general air of defeat that would have been convincing if I hadn't seen her practicing these exact expressions in our bathroom mirror for months. Her lawyer, Samantha Hoffman, looked like she'd stepped out of a legal drama where all the female attorneys drive BMWs and never lose cases. She had this briefcase that probably cost more than my first truck payment and a confidence that suggested she'd done this particular song and dance enough times to have it choreographed. Together, they created this picture of a fragile victim being protected by a fierce advocate, which would have been touching if it wasn't complete bullshit. Dr. Lawson started with what she called opening statements, where each side was supposed to explain their position calmly and rationally. Brielle went first, and sweet Jesus, it was like watching Meryl Streep perform Shakespeare while simultaneously solving calculus problems. She talked about feeling emotionally isolated and financially controlled, using terms that sounded like she'd swallowed a psychology textbook and was regurgitating it in alphabetical order. "I just want to feel safe again," she said, with a little catch in her voice that hit exactly the right note of vulnerability. "Marcus has made me feel like I'm walking on eggshells in my own home." She dabbed at her eyes with tissues that appeared to be strategically prepositioned for maximum dramatic effect. The woman who used to argue with me about spending too much on reality TV subscriptions was now painting herself as a prisoner in her own marriage. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple and factual, because Wade had warned me that anything I said could be twisted faster than a pretzel at a baseball game. "I built a successful business while supporting my wife's choice to stay home," I said. "I've never been physically or emotionally abusive, and I believe these allegations are unfounded." Dr. Lawson nodded encouragingly, like she was proud of me for using my indoor voice. Then came the fun part, discussing the actual demands. Samantha Hoffman laid out Brielle's requests like she was reading the lunch specials at a five-star restaurant. Half the business, the house, both cars, monthly support payments that would make a lottery winner jealous, and compensation for emotional distress that apparently was worth more than most people's annual salaries. "My client has been deeply traumatized by this marriage," Hoffman said, with the kind of dramatic flair that belongs on daytime television. "She gave up her career to support Mr. Hayes' business endeavors, and now she finds herself emotionally damaged and financially vulnerable." I had to bite my tongue to keep from pointing out that Brielle's career was answering phones at a dentist's office, and the most traumatic thing about our marriage was probably the time I forgot our anniversary and had to buy flowers from the gas station. Wade, bless his expensive heart, managed to keep a straight face while responding to these demands. "Dr. Lawson," he said, "my client is willing to discuss reasonable property division, but we believe these requests are excessive given the circumstances of the marriage." He had this way of making excessive sound like the understatement of the century without actually saying so. That's when Brielle really turned on the waterworks. She started talking about sleepless nights and anxiety attacks, about feeling like she couldn't speak up in her own home, about walking on eggshells and living in fear. It was such a convincing performance that for a moment, I almost felt sorry for this imaginary woman she was describing. Then I remembered that I was the guy she was talking about, and the last time she'd seemed afraid of me was when I accidentally killed a spider she'd wanted me to relocate outside. Dr. Lawson tried to facilitate some kind of compromise, suggesting we could work toward a fair and equitable division that considered both parties' needs. Brielle responded by escalating the drama, talking about how she just wanted to rebuild her life and heal from the trauma. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there thinking about how the only trauma in our marriage was the time she tried to cook Thanksgiving dinner and nearly burned the house down. The really rich part was when they started discussing the business. Hoffman argued that Brielle was entitled to half because she'd been emotionally supportive of my entrepreneurial efforts. Wade countered that emotional support, while valuable in a marriage, didn't translate to business ownership, especially since Brielle had never been involved in day-to-day operations, strategic planning, or any actual work-related activities. But she was there for the emotional labor, Hoffman insisted, like being married to someone automatically made you a business partner. By that logic, every wife of every successful man should get half of everything their husband built, regardless of actual contribution. It was participation trophy logic applied to marriage and business. Here we are, folks, the main event, the heavyweight championship of matrimonial warfare, the moment where months of preparation either pay off or I end up living in a studio apartment above a gas station while Brielle drives around in my trucks. The courtroom is packed like it's the season finale of some twisted reality show, complete with court reporters who've probably seen enough drama to write their own soap opera and spectators who showed up for the free entertainment. Judge Patricia Wells presides over this circus with the kind of no-nonsense authority that suggests she's seen every divorce scheme in the book and invented a few new categories of her own. She's got silver hair pulled back in a bun that could cut glass and reading glasses that she peers over like she's examining evidence of humanity's continuing disappointment. When she looks at you, you get the feeling she can see right through whatever bull you're trying to peddle. Samantha Hoffman starts the show with an opening statement that would make a Broadway producer weep with envy. She paints Brielle as this tragic figure trapped in an emotionally abusive marriage with a controlling husband who isolated her from friends, monitored her every move, and created an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. According to Hoffman's version of events, I'm basically a domestic terrorist who happened to own trucks instead of making pipe bombs. Your Honor, Hoffman says, her voice carrying just the right note of righteous indignation. Mrs. Hayes lived in constant fear of her husband's volatile temper and controlling behavior. The evidence will show a pattern of emotional abuse designed to break down my client's self-esteem and independence. She gestures toward Brielle, who's sitting there looking like a wounded bird who's forgotten how to fly, complete with tissues at the ready and eyes that seem perpetually on the verge of tears. Then comes the moment I've been dreading and anticipating in equal measure, the screening of Brielle's greatest hits collection. The bailiff dims the lights like we're at a movie premiere, and suddenly the courtroom is watching what appears to be a documentary about my transformation from husband to monster. The editing is actually impressive in its calculated deception. She's taken months of normal marital interactions and turned them into a horror film. There I am on the screen, raising my voice about that $1,500 purse purchase, looking angry and unreasonable while Brielle cowers in the background like I'm about to start throwing furniture. The audio is crystal clear, capturing every frustrated word, every exasperated sigh, every moment where I sound like exactly the kind of husband you'd want to divorce and take for everything he's worth. Judge Wells leans forward, studying the screen with the intensity of a film critic reviewing the latest blockbuster. I can see the jury members taking notes, their faces showing exactly the kind of concern and disapproval that Brielle was hoping for when she created this masterpiece of manipulation. For a few minutes there, watching myself on that screen, I almost believed I was the bad guy in this story. But then Wade stands up with all the confidence of a magician who's about to reveal how the trick really works. Your Honor, he says, what we've just witnessed is indeed compelling footage. However, it represents only a carefully selected portion of the actual events. With the court's permission, we'd like to present the complete, unedited recordings for comparison. The difference is like watching the trailer for a horror movie and then seeing the actual romantic comedy it was cut from. Suddenly, that angry scene about the purse becomes a minor disagreement, followed by an apology and a discussion about budgeting. The moments where I looked controlling and intimidating are revealed as normal conversations about household responsibilities and business decisions. Most importantly, you can hear Brielle's responses, not the scared, submissive victim from her edited version, but an active participant giving as good as she got. The courtroom atmosphere shifts faster than Tennessee weather in springtime. Where moments before there had been sympathy for poor, abused Brielle, now there's confusion and growing suspicion about what exactly we're all watching. Judge Wells removes her glasses and cleans them slowly, which I'm learning is her equivalent of counting to 10 before delivering judgment. But Wade isn't finished with his magic show yet. Your Honor, we have additional evidence that we believe the court will find illuminating. That's when Dr. Andrews takes the stand, looking like she could hack into the Pentagon during her lunch break, carrying a laptop that probably contains enough digital evidence to convict half of Nashville. Dr. Andrews explains the technical aspects of video editing with the patience of a teacher and the precision of a surgeon. She shows the court metadata proving when files were created, modified, and manipulated. She demonstrates how audio can be separated from video and recombined to create entirely different narratives. Most importantly, she presents evidence of deleted files that she recovered from our home computer system. And that's when Wade drops the nuclear bomb of evidence. The recording of Brielle and her friend Ashley planning this entire operation. The quality is perfect, the voices are unmistakable, and the content is more damaging than a hurricane hitting a trailer park. We hear Brielle explaining her strategy for making Marcus look unstable, and Ashley offering helpful suggestions about playing up the victim angle. The silence in that courtroom is so complete you could hear a pin drop in the parking lot. Brielle's face goes through more color changes than a chameleon having an identity crisis, shifting from confident to confused to absolutely terrified in the space of about 30 seconds. Her carefully maintained victim persona crumbles faster than a house of cards in a windstorm. Hoffman tries to salvage the situation with objections about the admissibility of the evidence, but Judge Wells waves her off like she's swatting a particularly annoying fly. "Counselor," the judge says, "these recordings were made in the defendant's own home using his own security system. If your client didn't want her conversations recorded, perhaps she shouldn't have held them in front of surveillance cameras." I watch Brielle realize that her months of careful planning have just collapsed in spectacular fashion. All those hours practicing expressions in the mirror, all that time learning video editing, all those carefully crafted lies, destroyed by the very system she'd tried to manipulate. It's like watching someone try to rob a bank and accidentally locking themselves in the vault. The best part, and I mean the absolutely beautiful, karma is real, justice exists part, is watching the jury's faces as they process what they've just heard. These are regular people who understand the difference between a genuine victim and someone running a con game, and they're looking at Brielle like she's something they'd scrape off their shoes. Judge Patricia Wells doesn't mess around when it comes to delivering justice, and let me tell you, watching her process everything we just presented was like watching a master craftsman at work. She sits there for what feels like an eternity, reviewing notes, studying documents, and occasionally glancing at Brielle with the kind of look that could freeze hell over. The silence in that courtroom is so thick you could cut it with a chainsaw, and everybody's holding their breath like we're waiting for the results of the world's most expensive lottery. Finally, Judge Wells puts down her papers, removes those intimidating glasses, and looks directly at Brielle with an expression that suggests she's seen some serious nonsense in her time on the bench. But this particular brand of stupidity has managed to impress even her. "Mrs. Hayes," she says, and her voice carries the kind of authority that makes grown men confess to crimes they didn't commit. "In 32 years of presiding over family court, I have witnessed many difficult divorces, emotional breakdowns, and legitimate cases of domestic abuse. What I have not seen, until today, is such a calculated and elaborate attempt to defraud both this court and the defendant." You could hear a pin drop in downtown Nashville from that courtroom. Brielle's face goes through more transformations than a shapeshifter having an identity crisis, cycling from confident to confused to terrified to something that looks like she's trying to figure out if there's a back exit she missed during her initial reconnaissance. Her lawyer, Samantha Hoffman, looks like she's mentally calculating how much malpractice insurance costs and whether her policy covers client turned out to be a criminal mastermind. Judge Wells continues with the kind of methodical precision that makes you understand why people respect the legal system when it actually works. The evidence presented by Mr. Hayes clearly demonstrates that the recordings submitted by Mrs. Hayes were deliberately edited to misrepresent the facts. Furthermore, the recovered audio recordings prove that Mrs. Hayes engaged in a premeditated conspiracy to commit fraud upon this court. That's when she drops the gavel with enough force to wake the dead, and the sound echoes through the courtroom like a gunshot at a library. This case is dismissed with prejudice. All requests for alimony, property division, and damages are denied. Mr. Hayes' assets are to be immediately unfrozen, and I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal prosecution. The word criminal hits Brielle like a freight truck doing 90 down a steep grade. I watch her realize that she's not just losing the divorce case. She's potentially looking at felony charges for fraud, perjury, and whatever other legal terms apply to trying to steal someone's life through elaborate lies and video editing. It's like watching someone discover that their get-rich-quick scheme was actually a get-arrested-quick scheme. But the real cherry on top of this Justice Sunday is Earl Jackson in the back row, actually clapping like he's at a football game and his team just scored the winning touchdown. This 70-year-old trucking veteran is applauding a court decision like it's the best entertainment he's seen since cable television was invented. His enthusiasm is so genuine and infectious that a couple of other spectators start smiling, which makes the whole scene even more surreal. Wade, professional to the end, stands up and thanks the judge with the kind of polished courtesy that you can only achieve by charging $1,500 for initial consultations. But I can see the satisfaction in his eyes. This is the kind of case that lawyers dream about, where justice isn't just served, but delivered with a side of poetic irony and a dessert course of criminal referrals. As we're filing out of the courtroom, I catch a glimpse of Brielle trying to have what looks like a very intense conversation with Hoffman, probably asking questions like, what does "with prejudice" mean? And how much does a criminal defense attorney cost? Meanwhile, Hoffman looks like she's explaining that her expertise is in family law, not defending people who commit fraud in family court, and that Brielle's going to need a completely different kind of lawyer for whatever comes next. The immediate aftermath feels like that moment after a tornado passes and you're standing in the wreckage trying to figure out what just happened. My accounts are unfrozen faster than ice cream in August, which means I can finally pay my legal team, buy groceries, and generally resume the basic human activities that Brielle's legal maneuvering had temporarily suspended. It's amazing how good it feels to be able to buy lunch with your own money after weeks of financial paralysis. Within hours, word starts spreading through the Tennessee trucking community faster than gossip at a church social. Earl, apparently, has a network of retired truckers who communicate more efficiently than the internet, and by dinner time, half the freight industry knows that Marcus Hayes isn't the villain in this story. He's the guy who outsmarted his own wife's attempt to destroy him. The business implications are immediate and overwhelmingly positive. UPS, which had been reviewing our relationship since news of the divorce proceedings leaked, calls to not only renew our contract, but expand it to include routes we'd been trying to get for months. Apparently, corporations prefer doing business with guys who can prove they're not domestic abusers rather than guys who might be, which seems like reasonable business logic when you think about it. But the real validation comes from my drivers and office staff, who had been walking on eggshells ever since the whole mess started. They didn't know what to believe when the accusations first surfaced, and I don't blame them. Domestic abuse is serious business, and they were right to be concerned. Now that the truth is out, they're not just relieved. They're proud to work for someone who fought back against false accusations and won. The irony of the whole situation isn't lost on me. Brielle spent months learning video editing, studying legal strategies, and practicing emotional manipulation, all in service of a plan that ultimately failed because she forgot one crucial detail. I'm the guy who installed the cameras. She used my own surveillance system against me, but she never considered that I might know how to use it too. As I'm driving home in my own truck, using my own credit card to buy gas with my own money, I can't help but think about how different this day could have gone. If I hadn't installed those cameras, if I hadn't hired the right legal team, if I hadn't discovered her scheme before it was too late, I could be the one facing financial ruin instead of Brielle facing criminal charges. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new office, and when I say new, I mean the kind of space that screams legitimate business success instead of guy who got lucky with trucks. We're talking about a building with actual parking spaces that aren't just gravel and good intentions, windows that don't require a crowbar to open, and a conference room where I can meet with clients without worrying about the ceiling tiles falling on their heads. Hayes Freight Services now operates 22 trucks, employs 34 people, and has contracts that would make my old competitors weep with envy. The business growth has been nothing short of spectacular, and I'm not just talking about the numbers, though those are pretty damn impressive. We've expanded into 3 more states, picked up contracts with 2 major retailers who apparently appreciate doing business with someone who's been publicly vindicated of domestic abuse charges, and started a specialty division for fragile cargo that's bringing in premium rates. It turns out that surviving a high-profile divorce fraud case actually makes you more attractive to corporate clients, not less. Who knew that proving you're not a monster could be such a good marketing strategy? But the real satisfaction isn't in the revenue reports or the new equipment. It's in the way my drivers look at me now. Before the trial, there was this underlying tension, this unspoken question about whether their boss might actually be the kind of guy who terrorizes his wife. Now they know the truth, and the loyalty factor has gone through the roof. These guys would drive through a tornado if I asked them to, not because they're afraid of me, but because they respect someone who fought back against lies and won. As for Brielle, well, let's just say her dreams of law school have taken a slight detour through the criminal justice system. Turns out that committing fraud in family court is the kind of thing that makes admissions committees nervous, assuming you're not currently dealing with felony charges that make higher education a bit difficult to pursue. Last I heard, she was working at a call center in Murfreesboro, which is probably the first honest job she's had since we met. There's something poetic about someone who tried to steal my business through elaborate lies, ending up in a cubicle explaining cell phone plans to angry customers. The criminal case against her wrapped up about 4 months ago, and while I wasn't supposed to feel satisfaction about my ex-wife getting convicted of fraud, I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel like justice. She got 2 years probation community service, and a felony record that's going to follow her around like a loyal dog. The judge in that case, a different judge, thankfully, because Judge Wells had already seen enough of the Hayes family drama, made it clear that schemes like Brielle's undermine legitimate domestic abuse cases and waste the court's time. I moved into a new house about 3 months ago, partly because the old place had too many memories of surveillance footage, and partly because success should come with upgraded living situations. This place has a 3-car garage, a kitchen that doesn't require an engineering degree to operate, and yes, I kept the security cameras. Once you've been burned by someone who turns your own protection system against you, you tend to develop a healthy appreciation for documentation. The difference is, now I'm the only one with access to the footage, and I sleep a lot better knowing that any future visitors can't use my own equipment to frame me. The biggest lesson from this whole nightmare isn't about marriage or divorce or even the importance of good legal representation. It's about preparation. In the trucking business, we have a saying, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, and always check your load before you roll. Turns out that philosophy applies to more than just freight delivery. I thought I was prepared for normal marital problems, maybe some disagreements about money or where to spend holidays. I wasn't prepared for a wife who turned domestic manipulation into an art form. But here's the thing about preparation. It's not just about having the right equipment or the right lawyers. It's about paying attention, trusting your instincts, and not dismissing warning signs just because they seem too crazy to be real. When someone suddenly develops technical skills they never had before, when they start asking oddly specific questions about your business, when they begin researching topics that seem unrelated to anything you're discussing, those aren't coincidences. Those are intelligence-gathering operations. Earl still stops by the office about once a week, usually bringing coffee that could strip paint and wisdom that's worth more than any MBA program. He's become something like an unofficial advisor, helping me navigate not just the business side of success, but the personal side of recovery from what he calls matrimonial warfare. His 3 divorces taught him that the best revenge against a scheming ex-spouse is living well, building something bigger, and proving that their attempts to destroy you only made you stronger. Wade Mercer has become more than just my attorney. He's now the legal counsel for Hayes Freight Services, helping us navigate contracts, employment law, and the occasional customer dispute. He still charges enough per hour to fund a small country's defense budget, but having someone who proved they can dismantle a fraud scheme makes me sleep better at night. Plus, he's got great stories about other divorce cases that make my situation look like a minor disagreement about who forgot to take out the trash. Dr. Susan Andrews occasionally sends me updates about new developments in digital forensics, partly because she's proud of the work we did together and partly because she wants to make sure I stay ahead of any future technological schemes. It's reassuring to know that if anyone ever tries to use edited recordings against me again, I've got someone who can prove their manipulation faster than they can say audio enhancement. Last week, I was having barbecue with some of my drivers after we landed a massive contract with a furniture manufacturer, and the conversation turned to relationships and red flags and how to spot trouble before it destroys your life. "Boss," said Tommy, one of my veteran drivers who's been married to the same woman for 25 years. "What's the most important thing you learned from all that craziness?" I thought about it for a minute, considering all the legal strategies and technical evidence and courtroom drama. Then I realized the answer was actually pretty simple. If your wife starts practicing emotional expressions at 2 in the morning, I told him, either buy her acting lessons or a good lawyer. Because whatever she's preparing for, you're not going to like it.